I mentioned this in yesterday's video, but we officially have our first time. So this is not number 4. This happens to be the first of 2 videos that were tied at number 3, and it's Valkauer from the Spire of Stars. And my god, do I hate this fucking raid more than a YouTube order going fuck himself. If I had my choice, this would be the bottom raid. This would be the worst raid Destiny has ever created. However, I had to go by my point system. I had to be subjective. I had to come up with a criteria that actually ranked all the parts of the raid. And when you look at the rankings of the Valkauer fight, it ranks pretty high. The raid itself is just terrible, man. And there are certain sections which I wanted to give negative points. But I had to be fair. And in theory, this boss does score pretty high. I actually had to flip a coin as to whether this one will go first or the next one. This one actually lost, so I'm fine with this one going in this particular spot. Now, I've also referenced whether or not I would choose the prestige version of this or the normal version. I'm going by the normal version of Spire of Stars. Reason for that is, there wasn't a big difference in the mechanics compared to the normal versus the prestige version. When Bungie rolled out those prestige versions of Eaters of the Worlds and the Spire of Stars raid layers, there wasn't any new mechanical items. The only difference were modifiers, whether you had to use a certain gun, whether they restricted your loadout, whether you had some crazy-ass perks that are only located in these particular raids. You know, the one where you get a melee and then your gun damage is higher, you shoot something, your melee damage... Oh, fuck that, man. That really wasn't a mechanical difference. That was mainly just a modifier. So, I'm going with the normal version because there was no mechanical difference between those 2 versions. So, to start it off, going through my 10 criteria, communication, this is a 4. There is no question. You need to talk a lot during this particular encounter, whether it's who's empowered, what symbols there are, who's on the symbols, who's going up, who has the ball, what your countdown is. There is a ton of communication throughout this entire fight. So yes, this is a 4. It is very highly regarded in terms of team communication. Unique elements. I gave this a 2. And again, I don't want to be cruel to this raid, but let's be honest here. We're standing on fucking platforms. That's it. We're standing on platforms and we're throwing a ball. Throwing a ball really comes from the Rise of Iron mechanics. We saw that with the opening mechanic where you had to throw the balls at Vossic. You had to throw the balls at Axis Prime where they had to hit the targets or hit him directly. So throwing stuff at a boss is nothing new. Throwing stuff at a target is nothing new. Standing on platforms is nothing new. Going to another realm, similar to what we saw in Calus, nothing new. So overall, I did give this a 2. Damage unlock. How do you unlock the damage? And this is the topic that I want to focus on in this video. If I could give this negative points, I would. Reality is, every boss is going to have some type of immunity because you can't just go into a raid boss, melt them down right away. There needs to be some type of teamwork. There needs to be some kind of mechanic. There needs to be some kind of communication that allows you to unlock the damage phase. Otherwise, basically, you just go run a strike. With every boss, you have to figure out how do you unlock the damage phase. What are the steps you need to take? And to be honest, this is very important in a raid because you do want something that's challenging for the entire team, but you don't want something that's crucially punishing. Spire of Stars in the Valkauer fight is punishing because all it takes is one little fuck up, all it takes is one tiny little mistake, and the entire damage phase is pretty much fucked. Getting to the damage phase is probably longer than any other raid boss. And the reality is, it's just step after step after step after step. And on top of that, all you're doing is jumping on a platform, jumping off the platform, jumping on the platform. I've joked about this before, but it's basically the hokey pokey. I mean, there are more fucking steps to unlock this damage phase than in a Richard Simmons Sweat into the Oldies video. Fuck this, man. If I can give this -5, I would give this -5. But there are a lot of steps. So overall, I do have to give this a 5. I have to give it the highest score. There's just no other way around it. I hate giving it the highest score because it is so crucially punishing. And if I wanted to be a punitive motherfucker, I could say, well, it's so annoying and long and unrelentless and completely pointless. No, I didn't do that. There are a number of steps. It requires a number of teammates to be on point. So yes, unlocking the damage phase to Valkauer is one of the hardest and one of the longest parts. The boss fight itself is not that bad. The damage phase is fairly easy. Getting to the damage unlock, doing all the steps, is the challenge in this raid. And because of that, I do have to give this a 5, although I really don't fucking want to. Variety of strategy. I gave this a 3. When the fight initially came out, when you look at all the items that we had at the time, using certain weapons really came into play. Initially, the Whisper of the Worm was not out when this raid launched. So a lot of people were using rockets or they were using a Darcy. Eventually the Whisper came out and it made this raid particularly easy. Back at that time, the Sleeper was also pretty damn good, so the Sleeper made quick work of the boss fight. Then on top of that, people figured out the Arc Strider strategy, where basically you put up a Empowering Rift or a Healing Rift, and then you go to work with a couple of Arc Striders and you can beat them that way. If you're able to pop them up in the air, which is sort of like a little glitch in a way, then you could avoid his main stomp mechanic. You could also have the Healing Rift to avoid the fire that he's going to have on the platform. You also had the Wardcliff strategy. So there are a number of different strategies, but essentially a big part of those were sort of cheesy, if you will, because essentially what you had to do was you had to really stand away from him. You either stood all the way up in the front rooms and you sniped him, or you stood all the way in the back and you hopefully had to avoid that lock-on missile that he had that absolutely destroyed teams. But if you were able to do it up close and melt him with a Wardcliff coil, cool. But otherwise, the variety of strategy, overall, I gave this a 3. Direct boss level threat. And this, even giving it a 2 is kind of a stretch, but you know what? I gave it a 2. Big reason why I gave it a 2 is, like I said, once you unlock his damage phase, he has that rocket that can absolutely destroy anybody. If you're even within distance or range of that, it is going to kill you. The fight itself and the boss itself, he doesn't hit that hard. He has a fireball while you're doing the unlock damage phase, but that doesn't do a lot of damage. The ads in the room, they do the majority of the damage. He also just sits on his platform the entire time. If you look at almost every boss that has ever been in a raid, almost all of them stand on a platform and they really don't pose a direct threat to the players. He's exactly this. I mean, he literally doesn't even move. I don't even think he shifts his feet. I think that's about all he does. He might do the stomp mechanic when you're trying to go all the way up to space to see what the symbols are, but the direct threat level, not that high. So overall, I gave this the 2. Mobility of the fight, I had to give this a 4. And a lot of that is the fucking hokey pokey that you have to do to unlock the shit. Almost the entire fucking raid, you're hopping on a platform, hopping off a platform, hopping on a plate, hopping off a plate, going up to orbit, throwing the ball, going to the back of the stage, throwing the ball to one another. There's a lot of mobility regarding the unlocked phase. The damage itself, basically, once it's time to do damage, you pick a spot and you unload on him whatever you do, whether it's the Arc Strider strategy, whether it's a Wardcliff coil, or teams split up on opposite sides of the room and you basically try and crit his back spot. But mobility all occurs within the general fight beforehand. Essentially, you do have to move around the room. You do have to hop on all these fucking plates that annoy the shit out of you, and you have to make sure that the empowered person is the one that goes up and calls the symbols. Recovery. This is a 1, and I would even give this a 0 to a certain effect, but I wanted to save 0 for things that absolutely could be fucked up. Yes, you can recover from a small mistake, but the mistakes in this are such a pain in the ass because you're basically on a timer to unlock his damage phase. If you miss a symbol, you mess something up, you didn't get a empowered ball to hit the target, yeah, you can recover a little bit, but it's a very short window. Absolutely short window. However, if one person throws at the wrong symbol, if one person throws at the wrong ball, if somebody at the end dies when they're trying to juggle the balls between one another, if you drop one of the balls, yeah, recovery on this one, man, it's very difficult. It's possible. But man, is it a pain in the ass. On top of that, deaths absolutely kill your runs. I mean, all you need to get is one person that dies and it messes up your plates. The people who are on the outside, plates 1 and 4, they have an absolute nightmare trying to defend those. But essentially, one little mistake and it's very difficult to recover from this. Teammates needed. Absolutely, you need a 5. There's no question about that. You need 4 people to stand on the plates and 1 person to be able to go all the way up to the top and call out the symbols. This is not debatable. The 6th person can basically hang out and just be an extra floater, but you do absolutely need 5 teammates on this section. Difficulty at launch. This is a 4. On top of the raid being a very high power level that people really couldn't get to at the beginning, trying to figure this guy out, man, was a challenge. On top of that, we didn't have the Whisper of the Worm when this raid launched. We were using the Darcy. Darcy wasn't bad. We were using Rockets. Rocket wasn't bad. Sleeper was pretty good, of course. But, man, the challenge on this one, on top of having to stay alive with all the ads that you saw, not having the gear that we needed in order to get all the drops, Bungie changing the way the heavy drops work where you couldn't get a purple brick just killing a yellow enemy, oh man, this was a challenge. This really was a difficult fight at the launch. The only thing that made this fight not a 5 and relatively easy was the fact that once you knew where to stand against the damage phase, after that it was pretty simple. Getting to the damage phase, figuring out the unlocks of the damage, that took most of your time. But once you got past that, yes, then you were finally able to get through this particular encounter. But overall, this was a challenging fight. Finally, rewards, and this is where I finally get to penalize the motherfuckers. 0! Nothing. You get no points for this Valkyrie because you didn't give a shit. The only thing you could possibly give that people wanted was the emote. However, you could have gotten the emote at any one of the prior encounters. You did not need to beat the boss in order to get the chalice, sitting, sipping, cup, whatever the hell emote that thing was. You also got the catalyst. I forget if it was the Telesto or the sleeper in the prestige version, but again, we're rating the normal version. But for the rewards, nothing. The helmet, I think that was it. And overall, if you had two of the pieces from the prior raids with the Leviathan Callus encounter and the Argos encounter, there was no difference in the helmet. It was basically just a cosmetic helmet that looked like a giant fucking beetle if you were on a Titan. But overall, no points. So, when you tally up the score, grand total, 30 points for Valkyrie. And you can see we're starting to get into the 30-point range now. So, Valkyrie tied for third. Tomorrow's video will show you who also tied with 30 points. So, as always, rate, comment, subscribe, and all that good shit. And I'll see you in the next video.